Around 5 years ago, when I was 21 years old, something happened to me that I'll never forget, and even now the memory remains vivid enough to make the hair on my neck stand up. I was attending a small college in rural Pennsylvania, about an hour outside of Pittsburgh, studying a specialized major in environmental science that few schools offered, which meant I was pretty isolated from everyone I knew. Most weekends, I would make the drive to visit friends at their larger universities since my campus was quiet and boring, and I frequently made trips during the week to see my girlfriend Sarah at her college, about 30 minutes away. One Friday evening in late October, I was heading out for a 2-hour drive to visit my friend Marcus at his school when Sarah called me about 15 minutes into the trip, saying that her car had died in the parking lot as she was leaving for her evening shift at the restaurant where she worked. And since I hadn't gone far yet, she asked if I could come back and give her a ride. Being the dutiful boyfriend I thought I was, I agreed immediately and pulled over to check my GPS for the fastest route back to her from where I had stopped. The map showed an upcoming exit I had never taken before that would cut through some back roads and get me to her location more quickly, so I texted her that I was on my way and took the unfamiliar exit off the highway. The detour took me down a winding 2-lane road that started with dense forest on one side and the highway on the other, but after about half a mile, the woods closed in on both sides and created this beautiful tunnel of autumn colors. It was that perfect time in October when the leaves were brilliant shades of orange, red, and gold, and I actually found myself enjoying the unexpected scenic route, despite the delay it was causing. The road stretched on with only occasional breaks in the tree line, where driveways disappeared into the woods, toward houses I could barely glimpse through the foliage, though from what little I could see, they looked surprisingly upscale for such a remote area. As twilight began settling in, and I had about a mile to go before my next turn, I noticed a silver Honda Accord pulled over on the shoulder with its hood propped open. A man in dress pants and a button-down shirt was leaning over the engine with his head buried under the hood, clearly dealing with a breakdown, and since there was no other traffic in sight, I slowed down and pulled up beside him to see if he needed help. He didn't seem to hear me at first, so I called out a bit louder, asking if everything was okay, and that's when he lifted his head and turned to look at me with what seemed like a perfectly normal, unremarkable face. He had short brown hair that was neatly trimmed, brown eyes, and some stubble like he had skipped shaving that morning, and when he smiled at me, he seemed like any regular person you would pass on the street without a second thought. He explained that he had been driving home from work when his engine suddenly gave out, and I offered him my phone in case he needed to call for a tow truck or someone to pick him up. But he waved off the suggestion and said he had a car service that would come get the vehicle. The service was closed until tomorrow morning though, he added, with an apologetic shrug. And then he asked if I could possibly give him a ride to his brother's house, which he said was only about 4 minutes down the road. Looking back now, this should have sent up immediate red flags, because why couldn't he call his brother if he had a phone? And why wouldn't his brother just come get him from where his car had broken down? But at the time, he seemed so normal and legitimate that I wasn't thinking clearly about the situation. I was physically much bigger than this guy, and he'd been driving a decent car, so I figured he wasn't some dangerous drifter, and that I could handle him if things went wrong. Plus, his brother's place was supposedly on my way to Sarah's anyway. So I unlocked the passenger door and let him in, and he pointed ahead down the road, indicating the direction we needed to go, and for the first few minutes, everything seemed completely fine, and I actually felt good about helping someone in need. Then gradually, things started taking a turn that made me increasingly uncomfortable, beginning with his reaction every time a curse word came through the rap music I had been listening to on the radio. He flinched noticeably whenever the artist said something profane, almost like the words physically hurt him. And I noticed it happening repeatedly, so I changed the song to something cleaner, thinking maybe he was just religious or conservative about language. About a minute after I had switched to a song with no swearing at all, he suddenly reached forward and slammed his hand down on the radio's power button, shutting it off completely. And while it wasn't a violent gesture exactly, it was aggressive enough to startle me and make me realize something was off. I tried to lighten the mood by asking if the music just wasn't his style, but my question was met with complete, uncomfortable silence that stretched on for what felt like forever. And at that point, I decided I wanted this guy out of my car as soon as possible. I asked him how much farther we had to go, since I needed to get somewhere soon and couldn't afford to be late, and he said we had about 4 minutes left, which immediately rang alarm bells in my head, because I was certain he had told me the exact same thing, roughly 8 minutes ago when we'd first started driving. That was enough for me to decide I was done with this situation, not because I necessarily thought he was dangerous, but because I realized he had lied about the distance and was probably taking advantage of my kindness to get a longer ride than he had initially let on. With Sarah waiting and already annoyed about how long I was taking, I told him firmly that this was as far as I could take him, and that he would need to walk the rest of the way to his brother's place. His entire demeanor shifted instantly in a way I wasn't expecting at all. Instead of getting angry like I thought he might, he became frantic and started practically begging me to take him the rest of the way there. His over-the-top reaction and the desperation in his voice triggered every instinct I had that something was very wrong here. So I told him in no uncertain terms that he needed to get out of my car right now before I physically removed him myself. That's when he frantically pulled out his wallet, which I remember thinking looked unusually thick and bulky, and he started trying to pull out a stack of $20 bills while insisting he would pay me whatever I wanted to just take him the rest of the way. But as he yanked the cash out of his wallet, something else came loose and fell onto the passenger seat beside him, and although he grabbed it and shoved it back into his pocket within a split second, I got a clear enough look at it to know exactly what I had seen. It was a small Ziploc bag filled with human teeth. Not just one or two, but a collection of different types, including what looked like front teeth, molars, and other varieties. And I know people have been skeptical when I've told this story, but I'm absolutely certain about what fell out of that wallet. I completely lost it in that moment, and screamed at him to get the hell out of my car immediately, and he jumped out onto the roadside, looking startled and confused, while I peeled away as fast as I could, without looking back. My hands were shaking so badly, I could barely hold my phone, as I called 911 and tried to explain what had just happened. But the dispatcher just told me that I shouldn't pick up hitchhikers, and that they couldn't do anything since the man hadn't technically committed any crime. I never found out where he was really going, or what he was planning to do. And honestly, I don't think I want to know the answer to either of those questions. What I do know is that, when I looked at his face, he definitely had all of his own teeth still intact in his mouth, which means those teeth in that bag came from someone else, or possibly multiple someone else's. This happened to me earlier this week, and I still can't wrap my head around it. I'm a guy in my mid-30s, and English isn't my first language, so sorry if anything sounds off. I was sitting in my car on the side of I-35 around midnight, just completely breaking down in anger. I'd pulled over somewhere between Dallas and Fort Worth, and I was totally alone in the dark, with tears running down into my beard. My stomach felt like it was in knots. The reason I was out there goes back about an hour earlier, when my girlfriend Kathy and I had this massive blowout fight. It was one of those really bad ones, where you both say things that you can't take back. She went all passive-aggressive on me, and I started yelling, which I'm not proud of, but I just couldn't stay there anymore. So I grabbed my keys and left, heading back to my apartment in Austin, where I grew up. The thing is, I got too emotional to keep driving safely, which is why I had to pull over on the highway. I was literally just sitting there, with my hazard lights blinking and the engine off, and it was pretty quiet, except for the occasional truck rumbling past. That clicking sound from the hazards was the only constant noise, and it was starting to get on my nerves. My whole body felt tense, and I couldn't stop replaying the fight in my head, like over and over again. I really hate when I get stuck in that loop for real. So once I had calmed down enough, I figured I should just get back on the road. I reached down and turned the key in the ignition, but it wouldn't go all the way. Like it just stopped halfway and wouldn't budge past that point. I tried it again with the same result, then tried a few more times like an idiot, but nothing worked. That's when the full reality of my situation hit me. I might actually be stuck out here all night. See, when I had stormed out of Kathy's place in anger, I had forgotten to grab my phone from her kitchen counter. So now without my phone, I had absolutely no way to call for roadside assistance or anyone else. The hazard lights were really driving me crazy at this point, so I shut them off. The second I did, I realized just how dark it actually was out there. Trucks kept going past every few minutes, but something about flagging one of them down just didn't feel right to me. I've never been good at just sitting around waiting when I could be doing something, so I decided to get out and walk. It was drizzling a little bit, but I wasn't too worried about that. I drive this stretch of highway all the time, so I knew there was a Chevron station at an exit about 1.5 miles up the road. My plan was to walk there and use their phone to call for help. I locked up my car and started walking on the outside of the guardrail, keeping the highway traffic on my left and a line of trees on my right. The moon was bright enough to light everything up, which should have been comforting, but honestly, I was pretty scared. My imagination started working against me, like I was literally turning every shadow from the trees into someone hiding there watching me. I'd been walking for maybe 15 minutes when the road started going uphill and the drizzle turned into actual snow. Apparently, it had been snowing here for a while because everything was already covered. Like the ground, the trees, all of it were completely white. I could see the exit sign up ahead in the distance, which gave me some relief since I was getting closer to people and light, and most especially a phone. There's an overpass right before that exit that crosses over the highway. As I was walking toward it, I happened to glance up and saw someone jogging across the bridge above me. It was definitely a woman, because I could make out her ponytail swinging, and she had this small, athletic build. The whole thing struck me as really odd, because who goes jogging at midnight on a back road next to a highway with nothing but woods on both sides? Before I could think too much about it though, she had already disappeared from view on the other side of the bridge. I looked around trying to spot where she had gone, but the darkness had swallowed her up completely. It felt strange, but I shook it off and kept walking, passing under the overpass and continuing toward the exit. When I actually got to the exit ramp, I realized I would have to climb over the guardrail to get onto it, because there were these massive bushes blocking the side I was on. So I climbed over, which meant I was now walking right on the exit ramp itself where cars would be driving. I noticed there was a footpath on my right side, just beyond those bushes, and I realized that path probably led back up to the overpass I had just walked under. So I kept on moving as carefully as I could because the pavement was slippery from the snow, but I was also trying to keep a decent pace so I wouldn't get hit by any cars coming around the curve. That's when it happened. Someone came out of nowhere and slammed into me from behind, driving me face first onto the pavement. I screamed in pure terror and immediately spun around, even though my jaw and ear were throbbing from the impact. The person was already back on their feet, standing over me, And that's when I screamed again, because I couldn't believe what I was seeing. It was a woman in her mid-20s wearing running clothes. It was the exact same person I had seen on the bridge just minutes before. But something was seriously wrong with her. Her eyes had this wild, unfocused look, and there was literally spit dripping from her mouth. She made this horrible shrieking sound that didn't even sound human, and then she charged at me again. I didn't even have time to get up before she was on me, going straight for my face with her hands. Her nails raked across my eyes, and then I felt this sharp, sickening pain as she drove her fingers deep into my left eye socket. I'm talking really deep, like she was trying to scoop it out or something, and the pain was beyond anything I have ever felt. I somehow managed to stumble backward, and when she came charging at me again, pure survival instinct just took over me. I grabbed her and threw her as hard as I could, and she went flying backward into the guardrail. The sound when her back hit that metal rail was awful, like this heavy, dull thud that I can still hear when I close my eyes. I collapsed right there in the middle of the road, clutching my eye with both hands. The pain was so intense, I couldn't think about anything else. Couldn't move. Couldn't do anything except kneel there, trying to breathe through it. I don't know how long I stayed like that, maybe a few seconds, maybe longer, but eventually I forced myself to look up. Through all the tears, and with only my right eye working properly, I could just barely make out her figure moving quickly back up that footpath, toward the overpass. That's when the adrenaline really kicked in, and suddenly the pain didn't matter anymore. I just started running down the rest of the exit ramp, falling flat on my ass at least 3 or 4 times on the slippery pavement. Each time I fell, I would scramble back up and keep running, not thinking about anything except getting to safety. When I finally reached the chevron, I basically threw myself against the door to get it open. There was this older guy behind the counter whose name tag said Robert, and his face went completely white when he saw me. By that point, my left eye had swollen completely shut, and I had blood running down my face from all the scratches. Robert didn't waste any time asking questions. He just grabbed his phone and called 911. The police showed up within maybe 10 minutes, and an ambulance came right behind them. The cops did a full search of the area. They searched the overpass, that footpath, the woods around it, but they came up empty. The woman was just gone. Now I'm sitting here in my apartment several days later, and I still jump at every little sound. I've been keeping all the lights on at night because I can't handle the darkness right now. The thing I cannot stop thinking about is why she did it. Like, what was her reason for attacking a complete stranger? Because the more I think about it, the more convinced I am that she wasn't just out for some innocent late-night jog. She was up on that overpass in the middle of the night, in the snow, for a specific reason. She was waiting for someone. I keep playing it back in my head, how she must have seen me walking under the bridge, then ran down that footpath to get ahead of me and hide in the bushes. She waited there in the dark until I walked past, and then she jumped at me. That wasn't a random encounter. That was definitely deliberate and planned. The police are still investigating, but they haven't found her yet. And without that, there's not much they can really do. I gave them the best description I could, and told them everything I remembered, but now it's just a waiting game. What really keeps me up at night isn't even the memory of the attack itself anymore. It's the knowledge that she's still out there somewhere, and the sick feeling that she might do this to someone else. Maybe next time it'll be someone who can't fight back like I did, or someone smaller, or even older, or less able to defend themselves. I don't know what I'm supposed to do with that thought. I just needed to get this all written down and out of my head, because I don't know who else would understand something this bizarre and terrifying. Has anyone else here ever experienced something like this? How do you even begin to process something so messed up? This happened back in 2003 when I was 18 and working the closing shift at a Denny's just outside Flagstaff, Arizona. And honestly, it was a pretty typical setup for that age. Me and my friend Rachel would close together, and then drive home to the same neighborhood about 40 minutes away. The drive wasn't anything special, it was just this empty highway with stretches of desert and maybe a gas station here and there. But we had done it so many times to the point where it felt like second nature. And besides, the late night tips were good enough that neither of us minded the commute. We would finish up around 11 p.m., sit in the parking lot counting our cash, and complaining about whichever customer had been the worst that night, then head out with the radio on and our minds already halfway home. It was boring in the best way possible, you know? Just routine and safe, and exactly what you would expect from a weeknight shift at a chain restaurant. At least until this one night that everything went sideways and turned that boring 40-minute drive into something I still have nightmares about 20 years later. So this particular night, we clocked out around 11:15 p.m., both of us dead tired and ready to crash, and Rachel did her usual thing of calling shotgun before we even left the building, which always made me roll my eyes, but whatever. We got in my car and pulled out of the parking lot onto the service road that connects to Highway 89, which was our usual route home, and for the first 15 minutes or so, everything was totally normal. We were doing our typical post-shift decompression, splitting up the tip money, talking about whether Jason the line cook was actually flirting with Rachel or just being friendly. All the meaningless chatter that fills up the drive when you're too tired to think about anything serious. Traffic was light like always at that hour, just the occasional big rig heading north, and a few random cars that would pass us or drop back. Just typical and spontaneous stuff. Nothing really weird. I mean, at least nothing that made me think twice about anything. But then maybe 20 minutes in, when we hit that really empty stretch, where it's just desert on both sides, and the highway lights get further and further apart, I noticed a car in my rearview mirror, and honestly at first, I didn't think anything of it because it was just headlights at a normal distance behind us. Probably somebody else heading home from work, or whatever. What started to bug me after a few minutes was that, no matter what I did, like speed up a little, slow down a little, this car stayed at exactly the same distance behind us, like perfectly matched to whatever speed I was going. I tested it by accelerating to pass this slow RV that was chugging along, and I swear the car behind us accelerated at the exact same second. And then when I got back in the right lane, they moved over too, keeping that same weird distance the whole time. Rachel caught me checking the mirror over and over and asked if something was up, so I told her about the car that seemed to be pacing us, and we both did that thing where you try to come up with logical explanations because the alternative is too creepy. We both went, maybe they're just using us to gauge their speed. Maybe they're half asleep and following our taillights without thinking about it. Maybe it's just a coincidence. But even as we were saying these things, I could feel this little voice in the back of my head, telling me, no, something is wrong here. You know that feeling, when you know something is wrong, but you just can't seem to understand it? Anyways, I decided to really test it by slowing way down, like dropping from 65 to 50 on a highway, where most people go 70, figuring they would definitely pass us and I could stop being paranoid. Except they didn't pass us. They slowed down too, like literally matching our speed, even though we were now going stupidly slow on an empty highway, with no reason for anyone to drive that pace. At that moment, Rachel actually turned around in her seat to look at them, and that's when things got really genuinely weird. She told me she couldn't see anything inside the car because their headlights were crazy bright and aimed upward in this way that felt almost intentional, like they were deliberately flooding our car with light so we couldn't see who they were. And the brightness was aggressive in a way that's hard to explain. It wasn't just annoying, it felt threatening too. I sped back up to normal speed, thinking maybe they would just go around us and this would all be over. But nope, they matched our speed instantly. So for the next few miles, I'm trying different things. Going faster, going slower, staying constant. And they're mirroring every single change, like they're playing some kind of game with us. Rachel threw out this idea that maybe their cruise control was locked onto us somehow, which we both knew was ridiculous, but at that point, we were just trying to make it make sense. And meanwhile, the highway kept getting more and more isolated with longer gaps between lights and no other cars around, which meant if something bad happened out here, we could be in real trouble. Then suddenly, and I mean suddenly, like 1 second they're there and the next they're not. Their headlights just went completely off. It wasn't dimmed or flickering like a dying battery or something, but just straight up switched off. For maybe half a second I thought, oh thank God, they turned off somewhere or broke down or something. And I actually felt this wave of relief wash over me, while Rachel and I both let out these nervous laughs and started making jokes about how we had freaked ourselves out over nothing. But then I kept checking my mirror because that's just what you do. And then I saw something that made my stomach just squeeze. There was still a dark shape back there. It was like this vehicle-sized shadow that stood out against the slightly lighter sky, and it was still following us, still matching our speed, but now in complete darkness on a highway with no lights. Rachel saw my expression change and was like, "What? What's wrong?" And I told her they had turned their lights off, but they were still back there, still following us. And she whipped around to look and confirmed it. This dark mass where a car should be, close enough that we could see its outline, but too dark to make out any details. That's when it really hit us that this wasn't some weird coincidence or someone with car trouble. This was deliberate. Someone was actively following us in the dark on purpose. And I made the decision right then that we needed to get off this highway and find people and lights and help, like immediately. The problem was, the next exit wasn't for another 6 miles, according to the last sign I had seen. And let me tell you, those were the longest 6 miles of my entire life. I pushed down hard on the gas, getting my little Mazda up past 80, thinking maybe I could lose them, or at least get to the exit before they could react. And for a few seconds, it actually seemed to work, because the dark shape got smaller and less distinct in my mirror. But then I watched it grow larger again as they sped up too. And now they were closer than before, maybe 3 or 4 car lengths instead of 10. And Rachel was grabbing my arm, asking what we should do, and I was telling her to find my phone and my purse so we can call 911, even though I already knew we probably didn't have signal out there. She was digging through my bag when suddenly their headlights blast back on. But not the normal brightness headlights have. These were like high beams times 10. Maybe they had those off-road lights or something, because our entire car filled with this harsh, white light that made it almost impossible to see the road. I'm fumbling with my rearview mirror, trying to flip it to the night setting, but it didn't help much, and my side mirrors were still throwing these blinding reflections that made my eyes water, and Rachel's got my phone. But sure enough, there was no signal, just that little searching message that might as well have said, "You're screwed." The car started coming up fast on our left side, and I remember thinking, oh God, they're going to try to pull next to us. And I was already in the right lane, with this steep drop-off to the shoulder that went straight into desert scrub, so I had basically nowhere to go if they tried to run us off the road. They pulled up even with us, and that's the first time I could actually see them clearly. The car was a dark blue Nissan Altima with 2 guys inside, and I couldn't make out their faces really, but I could see the passenger leaning way over toward the driver's side to stare at us, and he was making this motion with his arm like he wanted us to pull over. But it wasn't like a concerned, "Are you okay?" gesture. It was aggressive and demanding. I just kept driving, with my eyes forward on the road, and hands locked on the wheel. Even though they were shaking so bad, I thought I might lose my grip. And Rachel had completely given up on the phone, and was sitting there frozen with both hands on the dashboard, breathing in these quick, shallow gasps that told me she was about to lose it. The Altima stayed right next to us for what felt like an hour, but was probably 30 seconds. And then they did this thing that made it crystal clear. This wasn't just road rage, or guys being jerks. They literally and brutally swerved toward us, although it wasn't enough to actually hit us, but it was close enough that I had to jerk the wheel right to avoid contact, which sent us onto those rumble strips on the shoulder that make that horrible rattling sound and feel like your car is shaking itself apart. I got us back on the highway with my heart absolutely pounding and my hands trembling so bad I could barely hold the wheel steady. And the Altima dropped back behind us again, while Rachel is crying and asking, "What do they want? Why are they doing this?" And I didn't have any answers. I was running through every option I could think of, like should I try to outrun them? Should I turn off my lights too? Should I deliberately crash into something to get police to come? Should I just stop and confront them? But every single option felt like it would get us hurt, or worse. So I just kept driving and praying we would see that exit sign soon. When I finally saw that green exit sign appear in my headlights, I swear I almost cried with relief. And I took that exit ramp way too fast, with the tires squealing on the curve. But I didn't care, because I could see the lights of a truck stop about half a mile down the service road. And not just some tiny gas station, but a real travel center with a restaurant and a parking lot full of semis. The Altima followed us off the exit without even pretending anymore that this was coincidental. There was definitely nothing to hide anymore. They just straight up chasing us at that point. So I floored it straight toward the truck stop and drove right up to the entrance, where there were several truckers standing outside smoking. And I laid on my horn like a crazy person, making as much noise as humanly possible to get everyone's attention. The Altima slowed way down as it got near the truck stop entrance, and under those bright parking lot lights, I could finally see both guys clearly, for the first time the entire time. The driver had that whole early 2000s Eminem thing going on, with bleached hair and a white tank top, and the passenger was leaning forward with this expression on his face that I can only describe as pissed off that we had ruined whatever they had planned. They rolled past slowly while all the truckers turned to stare at them, and the driver looked right at me, one last time before he hit the gas and took off back toward the highway, disappearing into the dark. Rachel and I just sat there in my car for probably 20 minutes, with the engine running and doors locked. Without saying anything to ourselves, we're just trying to process what the hell had just happened and convince ourselves it was actually over. Eventually, one of the truckers came over and knocked on my window, asking if we were okay. And that's when I finally turned the car off, and we went inside to use the payphone to call the police. A highway patrol officer showed up maybe 30 minutes later, and we told him everything. We described the car, and described the guys as best we could. We even went over the whole route and what they had done. But I could tell from his face that he thought it was probably just some assholes trying to scare us. Nothing more serious than that, even though he did radio it in and said other units would watch for the vehicle. Here's the thing though, the police never called us back about it, not even once. And when I called them a few weeks later to follow up, they basically told me they had no leads and never found any car matching what we described. Rachel and I completely changed our routine after that. We started carpooling with another coworker who lived in town, so we could take a different highway that was more populated, even though it added like 20 minutes to the drive. And honestly, I quit that job a few months later, partly because I just couldn't handle the anxiety every time my shift ended, and I had to walk out to my car in the dark. It's been 20 years now, and Rachel and I are still friends, and we still see each other pretty regularly. But we don't really talk about that night anymore, because what is there to say? Neither of us has ever figured out what those guys actually wanted. Like, were they planning to run us off the road, follow us home, or just fuck with us for fun? But we both know that whatever it was, nothing good would have happened if we had stopped, or let them corner us on that empty highway. The whole thing changed how I see the world, you know? Like, it proved that bad things really can just happen to you when you're doing something completely normal, like driving home from work. Thanks for listening to this and letting me get it off my chest. Because even after all these years, it's still one of the scariest things that's ever happened to me.